My name is Jennifer Cupp, and this is my Assessment for Learning presentation for EDU 718 with Dr. Jones. We had four components for this case study that we are doing in EDU 718. And this whole entire case study is over formative assessments, the implementation of formative assessments with a unit of study. And so component one was the examination of grading and evaluation practices that we do personally in our classroom. So I really had to sit down and think about how I grade. First of all, just a little bit about me. I am the media specialist at my school, and I also teach dual enrollment. In the past, I have taught AP Literature and AP Language for the last 7 years. This is my first year where I'm only teaching dual enrollment. I have had a sprinkling of American literature classes in those last 6 or 7 years, but my primary focus has been the AP Language and Literature and dual enrollment with some occasional American Lit thrown in. So I rely very heavily, obviously a big focus in my classroom is writing. I rely very heavily on rubrics. I've been trained on AP rubrics. I've been trained on state rubrics for the EOC, and I use rubrics very heavily in my dual enrollment teaching. Something I also do that not everyone in my department has done is I keep a student data notebook. For every time a student writes, they get an entry for every single writing assignment in my notebook, and this kind of helps me compare the students to themselves. My students have mastered narrative writing, descriptive writing, cause and effect writing, argumentative research paper. In AP, they have done rhetorical analysis, synthesis, and argument. And then my focus when I teach dual enrollment 1102, just like my focus for AP Literature, I teach literary analysis, whether it be novel analysis, poetry analysis, or drama, plays analysis, or short story analysis as well. So I rely very heavily on the rubrics created by the state as well as the National College Board for everything that we write in my classroom. And students, through my data notebook I'm able to compare them to their former selves to see how they've grown and progressed throughout the semester. One way that I report grading is through PowerSchool. For the parents and the students, this is, of course, an electronic grade book. And then our school actually prints progress reports every 3 weeks. So parents are kept abreast of grades online in addition to by paper. What I did find for this, it's not the most helpful for this particular case study because we did not focus on writing, which is what I primarily teach for this case study. Rubrics and notebooks are extremely helpful, but what I've learned is that I put a lot of time and effort into grading. What I could do differently would be maybe more concrete data, perhaps using an online platform if there is one out there that exists for writing, because that is really what we did with this case study is we relied on peer assessment, breaking down all of our data on an online platform. Component 2 was organizing for collaborative work and development of short cycle formative assessments. This is when I joined a team and I decided to join the American Literature teachers since I have, taught American Lit in the past. I'm not currently teaching that. And I joined with the 6 other teachers A, B, C, D, E, and F. The primary focus of this class is the end of course test. And so what our system has done is we have some supports in our school. We have content coaches and we have instructional data specialists. Our content coach is the content coach for the middle and high school on both sides of our county. So she is over a total of 4 schools. And she has developed common unit assessments that tie directly to the EOC. So the American Lit teachers have to implement these common unit assessments 4 times or quarterly throughout the year. And what we decided to do as a group for this case study is to implement formative assessments as a means of review for this common unit assessment, because the EOC aligns to the common unit assessment, which aligns to their day-to-day teaching. So why not formatively assess their day-to-day teaching in preparation for the upcoming Unit 3 common unit assessment? So we designed the formatives for review, which of course review not only the common unit assessment, but also the EOC. And we decided to use peer assessment for this formative. Now, peer assessment is an online platform that houses questions, question banks, in addition to reading passages. And so we looked at the common unit assessment. The common unit assessment has both nonfiction and fiction, and it has writing questions. So we decided to break up and put these same things. We wanted our formative to mirror what's on the upcoming CUA. So I actually took the writing questions, since that's my area of expertise, and then other teachers took the fiction section of it, and then another teacher took the nonfiction section. And so we looked through peer assessments to find our questions that we would do this. I said that peer assessment was a support for this case study because we did not have to generate our own questions, but we just kind of had to sift through them. And we also have our instructional data specialist as a major support because she is a peer assessment expert, and she helps us to understand exactly how the data is broken down, which I will get to in part 3. A barrier, though, for me personally that I have is that I am not in the classroom. While I can plan with the American Lit teachers and develop formatives with them and break data down, I am not there, and nor am I in control of their day-to-day instruction or even how they give the formative. We can decide on a way to give the formative or a time frame, but who's to say that they actually do what they say they're going to do? So I really have no way of knowing what these 6 teachers actually will do in the classroom, and I don't have any control over that. That's what I found to be the biggest barrier for me. But for reflection, I think it's very important that I teamed up with the American Lit teachers because they do have this very important end goal in mind of the EOC, and we can work backwards with that common unit assessment and then to our formative. I learned that my strengths here helped create the formatives because having taught argumentative writing, which is what they had just finished in their Unit 3, I knew the types of questions that would help really gain an understanding of did they master the concept of argumentative writing and building arguments within an essay. What I would do differently, and something that I've said for years, is I stand in awe of my colleagues that know these standards inside and out. Being somebody that was trapped in the AP and dual enrollment world, I don't really have standards that I have to work with and have to check off, so to speak, like an EOC. It's more holistic and understanding of content. And yes, there are standards, but they're not our state standards. Yes, I've taught classes with state standards, but again, it was just a sprinkling of my schedule when I had those American Lit classes. But when I paired up with these teachers and the content coach, I saw firsthand how intimately they know the new standards inside and out, backwards and forwards. They can break it down, and it's always impressive to me when I see my colleagues do that. So hats off to them. But that's something that I would do differently, is maybe get a stronger understanding of the state standards and how they tie to the CUAs and in your day-to-day classroom. Component 3 was creating the actual framework for data analysis and the feedback that we were actually to provide. I did, as I mentioned, we did create this formative on peer assessment. We decided that it was 27 questions, and it was all multiple choice. It had one fiction passage, one nonfiction passage, and then writing questions. That was my part of putting that together. We decided with 27 questions and 2, long reading passages that the students would need 2 class periods to do this. That also allows for bugs or something to happen, with the internet or whatever, absenteeism, all of that. So they implemented the formative over Thursday and Friday, which left us Monday for data discussions and grouping. And so for the data, and this really is the component that I think I learned the most, our content coach breaks everything down by teacher results. And then she also breaks it down by mastery of standard. Something that I had to do for this case study, and I worked with the instructional data specialist to help me just understand the numbers, is breaking down the results by special programs for special ed and our ESOL students, as well as breaking things down for race. So I'm going to go through our results that I have put in our case study, or my case study. For the formative for common unit assessment, this is broken down by teacher overall. You can look that teacher C is leading the pack there with the average student score of 75%. Teacher A is right there with him at 74%. And then teacher B, who is our other classroom, like regular classroom American Lit teacher, is right there at 72. This tells me that the three teachers that are teaching American literature are right there together with only 3% sort of differing them. So I think that's pretty well, they're hitting the target that they've made together. If you look at teacher D, this is our ESOL teacher, and she has 59% is their average score. And then F is our co-teacher. So I was very impressed with that 65%. Our co-teacher F works with our teacher C. So you can see that while there's 10% difference in there, those kids are getting the majority of what they need to know. And I don't know because I haven't looked at statistics over and over again, but 10% separating your on-level kids from your special ed kids, I think that's still pretty darn good. E, I have to note, is the lowest performing teacher with this formative assessment because she is our self-contained teacher. She has, I think, 13 total students. Yes, 13 total students. And so their average score was 42%. They are never immersed in a regular ed classroom. They are not pushed in. They just stay in their self-contained class all year round. So that was the result for them. My content coach also helped. She broke down the formative data by standard, and I thought this was actually very telling too. It looks as if, and for this I should note that teachers D, E, and F are not included in this chart because this is something she wanted to do just for the classroom teachers that she works with on a more regular basis than the ESOL and SPED teachers. So teacher A, B, and C, most of them have their students have mastered standard RI3, RI4, RI5, and W1. So they can totally check those off their list. And teacher C is very close with his students at 70%, 76% mastery of RI4. So he's very close. But I thought it was interesting that teacher A, his students were able to check off of RI2 as well. What's very telling though is the average by domain. So, and she's highlighted here for us that the informational text is really leading the pack here. And if you look at key ideas and elements, that's 56% of the EOC. The literary for both craft and structure and the key idea and elements is lacking. So that it remains in the red, which tells me that these American Lit teachers have relied more heavily on informational text this year, which does make sense with the content because so much of what we read in American literature is historical documents or historically based documents. So I would say moving forward, just looking at this, and I'm sure this was her message to the teachers, they need to focus on fiction or literature rather than informational text because the students have done quite well with that. Now, this is where my sort of data breakdown came into play for this case study. I broke down this data, this formative, by special programs. And now I know it's very easy, your eye sort of is easily drawn to the red. The left side of this chart is the SPED and ESOL teachers, and the right side are the regular ed or on-level teachers. But everybody has a lot of red and a lot of yellow. But what I want to focus on is everyone also has green. Every single teacher has green, and 4 of the 6 teachers have blue. So there are distinguished and proficient learners even in, our self-contained classroom. And I think that's something to celebrate. So many times our eyes are drawn to the negative, but I wanted to focus on the positive. However, that yellow group is very, very concerning because those kids are developing. And so what that means is they're right there to me on the bubble, and those kids could be moved because the goal, of course, would be to move the red kids to the yellow to the green, and the green to the blue. I would try to focus on growing those green kids so that where there's more numbers with proficient learning, and focusing on those developing learners and try to move them as much as possible when you're looking at test taking skills and data. And finally, I broke down this formative by race. Now, this was something that was extremely eye-opening to me and something I had not even done in my own classroom when I had American literature, or even as I teach dual enrollment now. We had no African Americans in our distinguished learner category. And also, if you jump and stay on that same line and look, they also lead the pack with beginning learners by percentage. There's 39%. So that tells me that that's a very big barrier in our school, is that we need to do something maybe more culturally sensitive, or adopting culturally responsible curriculum and content to allow those African Americans to perhaps flourish. Maybe they need to read something that pertains to their culture or relates to them in some way. And that was just something that I noted in my case study, is that's a subgroup that I think we need to target. Of course, you have the majority of the students, I think, are in the developing learning category, in every subgroup except for the Black or African American students. So I think, again, that developing learner needs to be targeted as well. Reflecting over component 3, I feel like maybe our formative was rather long at 27 questions. This could have led to fatigue, and perhaps it led to lower scores for beginning and developing learners. I did learn so much about breaking down data. Again, wow, this was something I had never done in my classroom, and thinking about the barriers and the subgroups. I never see kids as subgroups, and I applaud teachers that can. I never do. I just try to teach all of them. And I know that sounds crazy, but I've never considered content choice as something that could help bring up those subgroups. But that was certainly a conversation that we had. Something that I would do differently, and something that, unfortunately time has not allowed me to do, is I think I'm going to and would like to present this to the other American Lit teachers so that they can see the two ways that I've broken this down. And I'm not crazy, I don't think, for saying this, but maybe the students need to see it too. If I were a student and I looked at, the lack of distinguished learners overall, but also if I'm a Black or African American student, I would accept that as a challenge, and I would want to say, we can do better. I know we can. Or I personally can do better. I know that I can. So I don't know. I know a lot of times teachers don't share data with students, but why not? They're part of the learning process. And I think that that's something moving forward I would do rather differently. Barriers that I realized after giving this formative and breaking down the data, of course, again, I mentioned our subgroups, ESOL, SPED, and African Americans. They need to be addressed and considered when choosing curriculum or choosing content for the classroom, and perhaps even test-taking strategies. Reading fatigue is very real. We hear that from students. We see it with students, having to wake students up during testing. But also, maybe we need to pick some smaller pieces and text to where students are not as tired out and can continue engagement with the conversation and with the materials that they're reading, have kind of a conversation with the author in their head. That's what I always try to tell my students, that maybe alleviates some of the fatigue. Concepts and themes and possibly vocabulary should be considered. Again, that's the idea, is choosing more culturally relevant or sensitive material that might draw in some of those subgroups, as well as providing, vocabulary supports as much as possible in the classroom, so that students are more familiar with that vocabulary as they move to their CUAs and EOCs. Component 4 was responding to data through creation of an intervention or extension action plan to address the range of students' academic challenge. So this, to me, was the fun part of the case study. We decided to do a 3-tiered intervention plan. We wanted to create something for the beginning and developing learners. We wanted to put something in place for the proficient learners. And then the distinguished learners as well. We decided, of course, to keep the same standards and address those same standards that the formative did because they tied directly to the Common Unit Assessment and, of course, the EOC. We decided to, as a group, to make this more fun and engaging than the formative was. So we wanted to take it off of this action plan, take it off of the platform of peer assessment and make it more personal and fun, and maybe even throw some videos in there. So we wanted to make it more engaging. And of course, this is all done in preparation, again, for the CUA. We decided to implement this intervention plan the Tuesday and Wednesday after we had taken that formative assessment on Thursday and Friday, and we grouped everybody on that Monday accordingly. We decided to group them sort of mirroring the grading of the EOC. So we grouped our beginning and developing learners together. If they scored a 68 and below to 80%, that put them in this category of beginning and developing learners. Students will watch the reenactment of Sojourner Truth speech performed by Cicely Tyson. I felt that this was very important because, first of all, this brings in an African-American writer and actress to reenact the actual speech. And so perhaps that makes it more culturally engaging and significant for our African-American subgroup. Then they're given a reading chart, which is a close reading, which I've included in my appendices of my case study paper, which pulls out the speech, but also section by section, it goes through questions about that, looking for those rhetorical and literary techniques that the author uses, that Sojourner Truth used to make her point. And then we decided that maybe these kids also, the beginning and developing learners, needed more help with online assessment. So after they do a paper copy of the close reading, they're going to jump on Common Lit, which is commonlit.org, and they're going to do that assessment that includes both multiple choice and one short answer response. So we get them writing in this, which is something we had not done with our formative, just so students can kind of see how everything builds on each other. And of course, writing is a part of the EOC. For group 2, we decided to group our proficient learners together. If they scored 81% to 91%, again, we're getting these scores, these marks, these percents from the EOC, and that's how they grade that. We went outside the box for this one. Students will receive a copy of Rick Grimes' speech from The Walking Dead, where he kind of rallies his troops, so to speak. This is in season 8, I believe it's episode 1, and we have them compare it to Patrick Henry's Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death. We have students create a Venn diagram of the two speeches, and they will find 2 similarities and 2 differences in the speeches and write a constructive response where they compare and contrast. The reason we chose this for the proficient learner is because on the EOC, they will have to compare and contrast and write about 2 different pieces or 2 different texts. And so we wanted to bring that challenge into it for those students. This is an extension of what they know and what they've done in class. And so we wanted them to do this and to see if they could take something from modern day and compare it to the themes. This is where we dove into the revolutionary themes of Unit 3. Like they have seen in Patrick Henry's Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death. So I think the kids really enjoyed this one. I will say some of the groups got a little jealous from what I've heard that, hey, they're watching The Walking Dead. Why are we watching, an old African-American woman, that kind of thing. But, you can't hit a home run every time. But Teacher A, I think, brought in Rick Grimes' speech for this one. I thought it was great. I thought it was very clever. Our last group, our distinguished learners, they are actually going to be quite challenged with this task. Students will pair Carl Sandburg's poem, I Am the People, the Mob, and do a quick TP cast and compare it to Frederick Douglass's What to a Slave is the 4th of July. This discusses the themes of revolution and action, and actually both pieces show this, and then they will have to write a constructed response. How does each text portray the power of the common man? And of course, they have to integrate textual evidence for both. This is a challenge. This is our challenging action plan because they have not taught poetry in Unit 3. That was poetry was covered in Unit 2. And so the teachers wanted to see if they could challenge their students to come up with something that they had done previously in Unit 2 and apply it to the nonfiction text that they that they looked at in Unit 3 in preparation for the EOC and the Common Unit Assessment, which of course, again, you have that compare and contrast to authors sort of thing. So what I think about this in component 4, they were really engaging. That's kind of my reflection, is they were very engaging lessons. I learned that the students enjoyed and responded well to that outside the box thinking, bringing in something different that they hadn't necessarily studied in class, but that held those same themes of revolution. And then something I would do differently, if I'm the classroom teacher, seeing how well they responded to video clips and short things like that, shorter text, I would try to employ that in my class as much as possible to engage them as much as possible, so that when they get to formatives, it's almost second nature, that they have prepared because they were so engaged in the lesson that they learned something along the way. So overall, what I've learned with this process is that it's really given me an insight into planning. I've never really seen firsthand how directly the EOC and the Common Unit Assessments correspond, and then how you really have to rely on backwards design, and your focus needs to be that Common Unit Assessment when you implement lessons in the day-to-day. I've also learned, the barriers that exist in my school for those subgroups. That's something, again, I had never considered. I thought that was very interesting. And then moving forward, what I would do differently is to encourage other teachers and myself to make, as many engaging lessons as possible. Something too that I think I could do in my own classroom is to implement formative assessments. I need to do a better job of that. Even though I teach dual enrollment, I think that formative assessments are beneficial at every single level. And it's not going to hurt me to throw in some kind of formative assessment or even an intervention plan before we have those major assignments in dual enrollment, those major tests, or even in-class essays or anything like that. Because to me, and listening to the teachers, that's where those light bulb moments came from, was when we did the action plan. And you could see kids kind of go, oh, I see what we're doing here. We're looking at different types of revolution that can come from poems, or can come from a TV show, or, can come from a speech in the past, and we're applying it, to our theme of revolution and things like that. So overall, I thought this was very, very interesting, and I really enjoyed working with my American Lit people again. I taught with them last year, and it's been a little lonely to transition to the media center and only have dual enrollment, because I don't plan with anyone else. So I really have enjoyed spending Mondays with them in PLCs and working on this case study all semester. Thank you.